The sun isn't up yet. The prairie is dark, cold, and silent. A cowboy rolls out of his bedroll, pulls on cracked leather boots, and without a word, begins another 16 hours in the saddle. He doesn't pack light out of minimalism, he packs light out of survival. Because out on the open trail, hundreds of miles from the nearest town, with nothing but cattle, dust, and open sky, every single item on his body had to earn its place. Dead weight got men killed. The wrong gear meant thirst, exposure, infection, or worse. So what did he actually carry? Not what Hollywood told you. The real kit. The 7 items that kept a cowboy alive when the frontier had every intention of swallowing him whole. Let's start with number 1. It looks simple. A wool blanket or 2, sometimes a canvas tarp wrapped around the outside, rolled tight and strapped behind the saddle. But that bedroll was a cowboy's only shelter on the trail. His home, his warmth, and on the coldest nights on the high plains, the only thing standing between him and hypothermia. Temperatures on the Chisholm Trail could swing 40 degrees between midday and midnight. A man who lost his bedroll didn't just sleep uncomfortable, he suffered. And suffering on the trail compounded fast. An exhausted cowboy made mistakes, and mistakes out there had permanent consequences. The bedroll was sacred. You didn't loan it. You didn't leave it behind. Water was everything on the frontier, and the cruel irony of the American West was that the land was enormous, breathtaking, and almost entirely unforgiving when it came to finding a clean drink of it. A cowboy's canteen, typically made of tin or wood, later metal with a canvas cover, was never far from his reach. On drives through West Texas and the Llano Estacado, stretches of trail could run 50, 60, even 80 miles between reliable water sources. Cowboys and their herds have died on those dry stretches. Cattle would smell water from miles away and stampede toward it. Men would watch their horses weaken beneath them. The canteen wasn't just comfort. It was the difference between riding into the next town and being found face down in the dirt by the next outfit passing through. Smart cowboys learned to read the land the way sailors read the sea. The bend of certain grasses, the flight patterns of birds at dusk, the way a draw cut through limestone. Much of that knowledge came from indigenous peoples who had lived and survived on these landscapes for centuries before a single cattle drive ever crossed them. Knowledge that, more often than not, went uncredited in the history books. A full canteen meant another day. An empty one meant the clock was running. Ask most people what a cowboy carried and they'll say a gun. But ask any working rancher of the 1870s what tool he couldn't do his job without, and the answer was rope. The lasso, drawn from the Spanish word lazo, brought north by the Mexican vaqueros, who essentially invented the craft of cattle herding in North America, was the cowboy's primary working instrument. 40 to 60 feet of braided rawhide or hemp, carefully coiled, always ready. Roping was a skill that took years to master. It wasn't just throwing a loop at a running animal. It was controlling a 1,000-pound steer in a full run, reading its movement, timing the throw, and then managing your horse simultaneously while the rope went taut and the world lurched sideways. Done wrong, a man could lose fingers, get dragged, or watch his horse go down hard. Done right, it was something close to art. The vaquero tradition that gave birth to the American cowboy is one of the most underappreciated chapters of frontier history. These were skilled horsemen from California, Texas, and northern Mexico who carried centuries of horsemanship knowledge into the open range era. The cowboy hat, the saddle design, the spurs, the terminology, rodeo, lariat, chaps, mustang, all of it traces back to that tradition. The lasso was never just a tool, it was a cultural inheritance. If you enjoy uncovering the real stories of the American frontier, the ones behind the myth and the legend, make sure to subscribe to Echoing Westwinds, where we dig into the history that shaped the Wild West, one story at a time. A gun was loud, heavy, and had one purpose. A pocket knife was quiet, light, and had 100. The cowboy's knife was the most reaching tool on his belt. He used it to cut rope, skin game, dig out cactus spines, lance-infected wounds, repair saddle leather, and prepare food over a fire that had to be built from whatever the land offered that night. On the trail, a sharp blade was a problem solver. A dull one was a liability. Most cowboys carried a simple folding knife. Nothing fancy, nothing decorative. The frontier had no patience for decoration. What mattered was the edge. A well-maintained blade told you everything about a man's discipline out there, because the same focus it took to keep a knife sharp was the same focus that kept you alive when everything around you was trying to go wrong. There's a reason the Bowie knife became legend in frontier culture. Big, heavy, brutally practical, it was born out of the same philosophy. The frontier rewarded men who could improvise, adapt, and solve problems with whatever was in their hands. The pocket knife was that philosophy distilled down to 4 inches of steel. Trail food was not a romantic subject. It was hard, tasteless, and eaten out of pure biological necessity. Hardtack, dense bricks of flour, water, and salt baked until they could survive a nuclear event, had been feeding soldiers and frontiersmen since before the Civil War. Cowboys bit into it, soaked it in coffee to soften it, or crumbled it into whatever was cooking over the fire. It wasn't good, but it was calories, and calories meant miles. Alongside hardtack rode beef jerky, dried salted strips of meat that could last weeks without spoiling in the open air. On long drives far from the chuck wagon, a cowboy stuffed both into his saddlebag and didn't complain. Complaining didn't fill your stomach. The chuck wagon, introduced by cattle baron Charles Goodnight in the 1860s, changed trail life significantly, giving cowboys a mobile kitchen and a cook who became one of the most important figures in any outfit. But between the wagon and the next camp, when a man was riding drag through a dust cloud, eating the trail's leftovers, hardtack and jerky were what kept him moving. The frontier built hard men partly because it fed them hard food. Weather on the open plains didn't negotiate. It arrived without warning, hit without mercy, and moved on without apology. The cowboy's slicker, a long oilskin or waxed canvas coat that reached past the knees, was his armor against it. Spring storms on the Kansas plains could drop temperatures 30 degrees in an hour. The Texas Panhandle served up hail the size of rifle rounds. The high trails through Colorado and Wyoming brought snow in months that had no business bringing snow. A wet cowboy was a cold cowboy. A cold cowboy lost feeling in his hands. And a man who couldn't feel his hands couldn't control his horse, couldn't manage the herd, and couldn't help anyone, including himself. The slicker also doubled as emergency shelter, ground cover, and on the worst nights, an extra layer over the bedroll when the wind came screaming across the flats with nothing to stop it for 500 miles in any direction. It was unglamorous, heavy when wet, and absolutely irreplaceable. This last one surprises people. Not a weapon, not a navigation tool, a simple metal ring, sometimes carried loose in a saddlebag, sometimes worn on a leather cord. The cinch ring had one primary trail use that defined its value completely. Cowboys used it to brand cattle on the move when a proper iron wasn't available, heating the ring in a fire and making do. But beyond that, it served as a field repair tool for saddle rigging, a makeshift buckle, a fire-starting aid when worked against dry material, and in desperate situations, a weight for fishing line when the food situation got serious. It represents something important about the cowboy's entire philosophy of survival. Nothing carried a single purpose. Everything had to work harder than expected, because the trail gave nothing freely, and the men who thrived on it were the ones who could look at the simplest object and find 3 more uses for it before breakfast. That resourcefulness, that refusal to be defeated by circumstance, is the truest thing about the American cowboy. Not the gunfights, not the glory, the ability to keep going with whatever was in his hands. The American cowboy wasn't a myth born in Hollywood. He was a working man shaped by a landscape that demanded everything he had and promised nothing in return. Those 7 items, the bedroll, the canteen, the lasso, the pocket knife, the hardtack and jerky, the slicker, and the cinch ring, weren't souvenirs of a romantic era. They were the tools of survival in one of the most unforgiving chapters of American history, carried by young men, black cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, and countless others whose names never made it into the history books, but whose endurance built something that still echoes across this country today. The frontier is gone, but its stories aren't. And that's exactly why we're here. If the real history of the American West moves you the way it moves us, the dust, the danger, the forgotten faces behind the legend, then ride with us. Subscribe to Echoing Westwinds, where the voices of the frontier never go silent. We'll see you on the trail.